Hello, hello, hello. Welcome everybody to the Breakdown with Berckenhoff, episode 27. Once again, we always have a lot of information to get to today, and today is not a expectation, if I can speak. Anyway, let's try to restart that. Alright, welcome to episode 27, everybody. Today we have a lot of news to get to, and so we might as well just, get into the news. Anyway, but before we do that, I always have to shout out freedomscoop.com. There's a group of individual content creators like myself that talk about the news from more of a everyday person's perspective and talk about society or just topics that we find interesting and we feel are important to educate our audiences on. On Freedom Scoop, you can find J. Edgar 101, Stephen Igaramus, The R-Rated Conservative, The Freckles and Brit Show, and the Generational Gap, and they all have shows that if you like mine, you might be interested in theirs as well. So, like I was mentioning, today we have a lot of news to get to, and most of the news is a little bit more of a extension over the Wuhan Lab that we have previously talked about on last episode, and the lab leak theory that has now been in the news cycle a lot more, as it's become more of a mainstream talking point. We're also going to be talking about Joseph R. Biden and some of his proposals and budget, and also his plans for other things. For other things out there, and Fauci's emails, and more Biden news. So we're going to be talking a lot about Fauci and a lot about Biden, but that's kind of expected as Biden is our president of the United States, and yes, he did win. Maybe. Anyway, let's just move on. So as we wait for this site to load up, it appears that we're having a little bit of internet issues. Alright, here we go. Oh, one second. Okay. So our first article was about Biden and Trump. And Biden ultimately wants to change the policies that Trump had for budgets and things relating to that. So let's just get into it. This is by USA Today. Biden offers to keep 2017 Trump tax cuts intact in infrastructure to counterfeit to GOP. In a concession to Republicans, President Joe Biden proposed that instead of raising the corporate tax rate to pay for a bipartisan infrastructure package totaling at least $1 trillion, they would work to ensure corporations don't exploit tax loopholes. So the idea here, and many people have speculated, and I think they're right to speculate these concerns and whatnot, is the fact that Biden is much more willing to have a much higher taxes to corporations. So it gets into the debate over the tax rate, because we all know that corporations are usually taxed a percentage, and they have ways to get out of that percentage. They don't necessarily be able to get out of getting taxed at all. Most corporations still have to pay a little bit of a tax, but there are several things out there that allow corporations to exploit loopholes and receive less money than to give the government less money than they were supposed to. And that is something that Biden has always talked about that he is wanting to stop. And Donald Trump, as the person this article is talking to in the previous president, was much more of a person to suggest that corporations should be taxed less. So you get into the debate that's always been out there when it comes to businesses over how much money corporations should be taxed. And I think that is almost always going to be a debate. And as I was saying earlier, it's important to think about how that might happen. Because if you do want to tax corporations higher, you will have to then take concerns for how high that tax has to be. So putting an example that you always hear about is with fast food. If you require a higher tax on fast food companies, it's very possible that McDonald's and some of the bigger chains will simply go to more automation, and it may cost a higher cost up front for the companies to move to more robots and whatnot, but in the long term, they would save a whole bunch more money going to be more automated, and a higher tax would give them the incentive to go ahead and do that, because I'm sure right now there's companies looking into if they should become more automated, and McDonald's has made some steps recently to suggest that they are taking that route. So giving them another reason to do so, especially if it's a very high tax rate, will give a company like McDonald's and many others the idea of hiring less overall human workers. And that could also become a major problem. So I think that is almost always going to be a debate. But let's move on and see what this article has to say. Biden's latest infrastructure counter-offer proposed to Republican senators this week would keep intact Donald Trump's 2017 tax cut that they proposed unwittingly, calling it a red line in their negotiations with the White House. The tweaked proposal would no longer rise the corporate tax rate from 21% to 28%, relying on other funding components of Biden's America Jobs Plan, beefing up tax enforcement on the country's wealthiest earners and ensuring the largest corporations, some of which have been avoiding paying any taxes because of loopholes, pay at least a minimum of 15%. There should be accountability acceptable to a number of Republicans who have said that their bottom line is that they want to keep the 2017 tax law untouched, White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki said Thursday. Psaki made clear that Biden has not abandoned his push to increase corporate tax rate to pay for proposals such as a $1.8 trillion families plan that includes subsidized child care and national pre-kindergarten. So this idea of a national pre-kindergarten, I've heard a lot of more conservative news anchors talk about a little bit, is their suggestion for trying out a more socialized education. In other words, like universal health care, there would be universal education. Now you may be saying that public school already has universal education, but you're not necessarily saying the same thing. And when it comes to pre-kindergarten, there's some education relating to what gets taught, but it is more of a daycare where they can set boundaries and can set life skills that the children will learn, and then set general more knowledge, like maybe a start on the ABCs and things like that. So it's more talking about child care, and child care is something that a lot of single moms and minorities have to deal with. So the idea that they could be trying something like this, but it ultimately goes back to Joe Biden. It ultimately goes back to Joe Biden and how much money he is wanting to put up for these plans. Because we do know, and as we talked about last week, there's a big push for simply throwing money to solve the solution. And the problem with that is in the future, we're going to have to come up with the money that is being thrown at the situation now. Because there's not a world we can live in where we simply print, and don't have to pay it back. So it is going to become a huge problem. But the way Biden is viewing it, and the way Biden, I think, wants to fix these problems, is by spending a significant amount of money to do so. And I think that is what he is doing. So that is our first point. And once again, all of these articles are linked in the channel description of your podcast or where you are listening to it live. And I will wait for my next topic to load up here, and this first article will be by CNN. But we'll just continue to talk just a little bit more. Like I said last week, I would love to hear your idea if you think that the U.S. is headed in a way that we can no longer recover from, because we are printing a huge amount of money. Oh, I don't know why it did that. Sorry about that. The microphone looked like it cut out. Alright, we should be good now. Alright, so now we have our next article. This is a CNN article, like I mentioned. Manchin signals he's not ready to buck Republicans on key issues. West Virginia Democrat Senator Joe Manchin, a pivotal swing vote for the party, is making very clear he's not ready to abandon Republicans for Democrats to try and push legislation on their own, as President Joe Biden's agenda faces a crucial month in June. In an interview with CNN on Thursday, Manchin said bipartisan infrastructure talks could continue even as pressure builds for Democrats to move ahead without Republicans, and he dismissed calls to create a special caveat for the senator's filibuster rules to pass a voting overhaul bill along straight party lines, a key priority for Democrats that faces stiff opposition from GOP lawmakers. Manchin heads into a pivotal time for Congress, where a number of key policy issues are in the razor edge in the Senate, giving the swing Democrat enormous sway over the future of the Biden agenda. At the centerpiece of that agenda is the infrastructure package that Biden and Republicans are fiercely negotiating in a last-ditch attempt to cut a compromise, though they remain far apart. And this is Manchin's opinion on the filibusters we get to, because I'm forgetting the senator now, but there was a senator who went on a major filibuster. I don't think he broke any records, but it was still a very long filibuster. The idea being to expand the amount of time on the bill so that the bill will eventually die or have to be forced to move to a new day. Manchin also signaled that he is not open to changing Senate rules to create a crave out to eliminate the filibuster, to pass voting legislation on a simple majority party line vote, suggesting that such a move could come back to hurt Democrats in the future when they are in the minority. And I think this is a huge thing, because it may benefit you now, but we all know that politics rotates on a spinning wheel or a seesaw. One party will be up, and then the next election cycle, the one party will be down, and it rotates. And that is extremely important to think about. And I think Manchin is actually very smart when he's talking about this and when he's thinking about it, because you have to notice and you have to be very careful over how you want to do something like the filibuster. And if you decide to get rid of it, then you may hurt your chances for a bill that is being run by Republicans. And if you would think about it in this way, the next president, if they are Republican, may try to push a lot more Second Amendment rights, because Biden is suggesting to take some away. So the idea that the next Republican president would push Second Amendment would be huge. And a lot of Democrats would not be for a bill that pushes more Second Amendment rights. So the idea that the filibuster no longer exist means that it will be very hard for Democrats to block that bill, especially if they both have the Senate and the House. But we are going to play a little bit of this CNN video where it is Manchin and the CNN reporter as we wait for it to load up here.
It's time to make some noise. The street.
We got an ad we have to wait through. Gotta love ad. Usually I have the ad blocker on, but I guess I forgot to turn it on or something. But I think we're always going to have these dang ads. So that is just lovely. But we'll wait for it to load. Alright, looks like we're ready to go here. Come on, load.
We're about to hear right now from a key Democratic senator whose vote could make or break President Biden's infrastructure plan. We're talking about the West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin. He just spoke to our chief congressional correspondent, Manu Raju, who is on the scene in West Virginia. More.
It's waiting to load here.
West Virginia for us, Manu. So what did he tell you?
Well, as Democrats are losing patience with these bipartisan talks with the White House between Senate Republicans on a major infrastructure package, one person is not, and that's West Virginia.
Well, I don't think we're going to be able to play this video. That's unfortunate, but it's a usual mass media report of it, so it's not like we're losing too much not being able to hear the video because it's buffering so much. But we'll get into our next article by the Washington Post. Once it loads, here we go. If it doesn't move Senator Joe Manchin, then nothing will. President Biden has sliced hundreds of billions of dollars off his latest infrastructure offer to Republicans. Multiple news outlets are reporting he has offered a $1 trillion package, down from his last offer of $1.7 trillion. This is plainly intended as a message to the West Virginia Democrat, but the message is larger than it first appears, making the question of whether Manchin will hear it all the more consequential. I cannot read today. Let's continue. The message is, if the Republicans reject this, it should be clear that Republicans are beyond hope as a governing party on any terms that Manchin himself would find acceptable. If so, it's time to move on the passage of the bill via the simple majority reconciliation process. But that's not all. If that is so, it is time to seriously debate reforming the filibuster. Biden's latest offer is a more dramatic move towards Republicans than anything they have offered. The last proposal from Republicans was for $928 billion, but that was existing baseline spending. Only $257 billion was new spending. Worse, the new GOP spending is funded by Repro's COVID-19 rescue funds. Other Republicans have suggested a gas tax hike or user fees, which are recessive and non-starters for Democrats. Biden's new offer, meanwhile, is for the $1 trillion, importantly, all that is new money on top of the baseline spending. So that is extremely important, and once again goes back to how much we print could have a huge impact, because that is $1 trillion of money that we are printing, and it may not go back into the infrastructure. But I do want to state one more kind of major point here, and that is the factor that the left likes to use when talking about issues like this. The left wants to be clear that these are things we need to be spending the money in, because it is very important that we improve hospitals, and that we improve COVID, and that we improve these numerous other topics right now, so that we make the life the average American lives better. And it's important that we spend this money, because we still need to have better overall systems. The left loves to say other countries are better in healthcare. Other countries are better in their COVID response. Look at what they're doing. If we spend money to do something similar, or to do the same thing that that country is doing, we can improve our system, and we can have better living conditions. We could have better hospitals. We could have better health care. We could have better, A, B, C, or D. And if we do that, we make America a better place, and that is important. And I do think that they do have a reason to suggest that, and a reason to believe that. It's important that we do make America a good place to live, and a place that people are you could say proud of. And improving healthcare, improving hospitals, and improving numerous other topics is important. And that money may be useful to be able to spend it more. That being said, you obviously have to think about how much money you're willing to spend when it comes to this. Because if you make a mistake, print too much, and the situation doesn't even improve, then you have really set the country back, and it made the situation much, much worse. And it's hard to say ultimately what thinking is right. And I just wanted to pause a little bit and just think, because I think that is in a large part what the country needs to do when it comes to policies like this. Because spending a lot of money, and I'm no economic expert, but spending a lot of money and to help the situation improve isn't necessarily a bad thing. But if you spend money and the situation doesn't improve, or doesn't improve as much as you want it to improve, then you have really set the country back extremely, extremely far, as I was just mentioning. And I don't think that Biden necessarily is doing this with bad motivations. I think that Biden truly believes that by spending money in his emergency plan, helping hospitals, helping healthcare, helping the COVID rescue plan, he will be able to greatly improve the lives of Americans, and especially minorities, and especially poor Americans, because that is ultimately what I think Biden's target is on. And the previous president, Donald Trump, his target was more on improving the average American, the average household. And I don't think that Trump's motives were against the poor necessarily, but I think that Biden's motives are focused on poor Americans, and then to the second part, to minorities. I'm not saying that all the minorities are poor. I'm just saying that those are his two topics. And he's focusing large amounts of money on trying to resolve those issues. And if you do spend this money wrong, and you decide to invest in something that doesn't end up working out, that is a big problem. And that is what a lot of conservatives are pointing out. And then the left are pointing out that these policies need to be done now because we need to make America a better living condition. And America is not great. And America is not the land of freedom if we decide to make the poor poorer, and if we decide not to help the poor, numerous other things that you always hear when you listen to left creators or content creators when it comes to topics like these. So I don't think that either side is 100% right. There's probably something in the middle that should be done, such as spending some money to help the situation, but probably not spending as much money as Biden wants to do. And I'm not even sure exactly how he wants to use this money to help the situation. And I think that also needs to be stated, because without knowing details of how he plans to use this money directly and specific details, it's hard to sit here and say that that money is 100% useful, 90% useful, 70% useful, 50% useful. It's hard to give it a statistic of how much of that money is actually needed, and that is a big problem. So that is a huge problem. We're going to go to our first video for today's topic, introducing our first topic with Trump's appointed postmaster. Postmaster being the guy who's in charge of the post office, and this was under the DOJ investigation over Trump's nominee, or Trump's postmaster, not really nominee, but Trump's postmaster during the election, and the things he did that kind of seemed like he was trying to potentially rig the election, and he got up and is now being investigated and whatnot. But we'll go ahead and listen to this CNN posting of it.
In our politics lead, the FBI is investigating campaign contributions made by the employees of Postmaster General Louis DeJoy to Republican candidates. Now, DeJoy has been embroiled in controversy ever since he took office in May 2020. He gave $1.1 million to joint fundraising efforts for Trump's reelection campaign and the Republican Party. And once he was in office, reduced overtime and put limits on mail trips for mail carriers, which led to massive mail delays in the lead up to the 2020 election, when, of course, a record-breaking number of Americans were voting by mail because of the pandemic, disproportionately Democrats voting by mail. DeJoy was thus accused by some Democrats of trying to secretly sabotage the election. CNN's Kristen Holmes joins us now. Kristen, what do we know about these campaign contributions by his staffers, and how unusual is that?
Well, Jake, if proven to be true, it will be highly unusual and frankly inappropriate. I mean, here's what we know so far. This appears to be following reports last fall that cited former employees of DeJoy's, most of them anonymous.
So the idea here being campaign finances, and also related to his conduct as postmaster of the post office during Trump. And having campaign finances directly to Trump, if true, would show that he has hidden motivations, or motivations that shouldn't exist serving that role. In other words, if you're the vice president of Donald Trump, or let me think of a better example. If you work in Trump's cabinet as his member and you give money to Trump's campaign, that can't be done because there is conflict of interest, and there's set rules with campaign financing that allow that to not exist, with my understanding. So I believe that it would be the same for the postmaster of the post office. So, if that is true, from what I've heard and what from CNN suggests, it could suggest that DeJoy and the postmaster here is not in good terms with the law and could have a major investigation going his way. But it's hard to know exactly how campaign finances are used, because campaign finances are written purposely a little bit gray and have many loopholes that people are able to do, such as super PACs and PACs, that allow campaign donations to be hidden from the public and probably hidden from the government itself with a little bit extra work. So it's hard to know exactly where the money is going from. It's kind of like the classic example. If you give your $100 to your friend to give to okay. So you have Joe running for office, and you can't give $100 to Joe, but you want to. So you give it to your friend Brian, who's not working for Joe, to give your money to Joe. That's kind of what you can do. You can simply give it to someone else to have them give it to the person you intended to give it to in the first place. So that is kind of the idea, and one of the more common ways that people like DeJoy, are people who work in politics, are able to get around it. But we'll play this CNN article just a little more.
Anonymously speaking, who said that while working for DeJoy, they felt urged to, and at times pressured, donate to Republican candidates. And those who did actually received money back in the form of bonuses. Now, this is something that DeJoy vehemently denies. But here's what a statement from his spokesperson said. It says, Mr. DeJoy has learned that the Department of Justice is investigating campaign contributions made by employees who worked for him when he was in the private sector. He has always been scrupulous in his adherence to the campaign contribution laws and has never knowingly violated them. But of course, one thing to note here is, of course, we know DeJoy is a big-time Republican donor. He was a Trump mega donor. He is a bundler. So all of this is highly suspect and something that we've been hearing about for a long time, but now, of course, we know is under a formal investigation.
Is there any chance here that DeJoy would lose his position as Postmaster General, which would be very difficult for him to be forced out?
Yeah, that's always...
So before they answer the question, I just wanted to say a couple of things. One thing, feeling pressured by your boss to donate to a campaign, I don't know if is illegal. It would depend on exactly what DeJoy is doing. But I don't really think that there's any laws preventing your boss from doing something like that. I could be totally wrong, and I would love to know if I am wrong in the comment section of this video. I just talk. I try to understand things, but I also don't know everything. So I'd love to hear with your comments if I do say anything wrong. And I may be wrong on that point. But I don't really believe that it is illegal. Now, if you blackmail someone into giving money to a campaign that you're in support of, or if you force somebody with like the contract you signed to be a postman or to work in the post office, and that's illegal, or if you those are all illegal. Now, the only thing that, again, I'm not sure if this is true or not, but it could be something like insider trading, meaning that if you do work in the business and you tell someone about something that you're really not supposed to, you can be in trouble for that. In the case of insider trading, it would be calling your big investor for your company before it goes down to let them know to sell. That is illegal. So there could be a similar law when it comes to finances and campaign donations, where your boss is not allowed to tell you where to give your money to, and that could also very much be the case. And I could see something like that, especially when it's about politics. Politics and the workplace are usually kept on two different fields. There's some workplaces that probably bring up politics a little more than others, besides the obvious, like the Army, military, National Guard, police, people like that who work in those fields. But the average worker of the United States probably has some sort of thing where they're not really supposed to talk about politics. And the post office is technically a government company or government business. So I would think that you wouldn't necessarily be allowed to talk about it either. But once again, I'm not sure on which case is true or not, or if both cases are true, just depending about what you say or how you do it. But we'll let them answer the question.
This is the big question, Jake. Of course, we know people have been calling for his ouster now for roughly a year. The thing that's important to note is that the only people who can remove DeJoy from office are the Board of Governors, that Postal Service Board of Governors. And for all of the allegations through the election, we have heard from the Board of Governors saying that they have full confidence in DeJoy. And right now, there's no indication that that has shifted. Now, President Biden has added more people to the Board of Governors. However, in order to actually oust DeJoy, they'd have to get some of those Trump-appointed, Trump-nominated members to sign up for that. And again, there's no indication of that. Now, the press secretary was asked whether or not Biden believed that DeJoy should be removed or replaced. And unsurprisingly, she dodged the question, saying that he would like the investigation to just play out. But again, it is ultimately going to be up to that Board of Governors. We'll have to see where this investigation goes.
All right, Kristen Holmes, thanks so much. CNN's Abby Phillip joins me now here in studio. And as Kristen just noted, Biden can't remove DeJoy. It's up to the Board of Governors. Now, Congressman Bill Pascrell, a Democrat of New Jersey, he wrote a letter to the three Biden appointees.
So we don't have to necessarily listen to this next part where they talk about the idea of how ultimately to remove the postmaster from its job. And as you heard from the CNN host, it is hard to remove him from his position without a process that he just mentioned. But that's not ultimately the main focus. So let's get into our first article talking about the situation of the postmaster being under investigation. This first article is by CNN, or not CNN, this first article is by NPR. Excuse me. The U.S. Department of Justice is investigating controversial Postmaster General Louis DeJoy in connection with campaign contributions made by former employees of the longtime businessman. Mark Carliola, the spokesperson, said in a statement that the department is probing contributions made by employees who worked for him while he was in the private sector. DeJoy had been a Republican mega donor. We already heard that. Here we go. During his short time as head of the Postal Service, the agency has faced harsh criticism for cost-cutting measures sought by DeJoy, which critics say were part of an intentional effort to slow down mail service in the months leading up to the 2020 elections. And if I remember this right, when DeJoy was named postmaster and put into the position under Trump, he started to cut back on mailing routes and how many employees there were and other major things. And I believe the reason he gave for it was because the post office themselves spends a lot of money, and he wanted to cut back on the budget so that they are able to operate more efficiently, and that was an excuse he gave. And then Democrats, as we've heard, took it as an intentional effort to reduce the mail-in ballots that are largely are largely Democratic, because Democrats usually are more willing to do mail-in ballots than Republicans. So that is a important note. It also says here, DeJoy during the congressional hearings last year into the issue denied the service cutbacks were related to any effort to deter voting by mail. In August, DeJoy agreed to postpone the controversial changes at the agency, which included reducing overtime employee hours and eliminating hundreds of postal sorting machines, as we wait for this CNN article to load over the same situation. Alrighty, as it's loading up here. Alrighty. DOJ investigation political fundraising by controversial Postmaster General Louis DeJoy. I apologize for the delay. I tried to get all of these articles loaded up, but I don't think that they loaded before we started here, even though it anyway. Sorry about that. The Justice Department is investigating the Postmaster General Louis DeJoy's political fundraising. DeJoy spokesperson, we read about what the spokesperson said. We'll go down here. The news follows reporting from the newspaper last September. DeJoy, a longtime ally of President Trump, was appointed to lead the post office. David Young, a longtime human resource director of New Bread Logistics, told the Post that when DeJoy was fundraising for the Republican Party, he asked employees for money. We gave him the money, and then he reincorporated by giving us big bonuses. So there we go. We get a claim about what he did. So now we can be a little bit more specific on on the motives and what he did. In other words, knowing a detail of what DeJoy was supposedly have done, let's talk about if it is illegal or not. And from what I see there, it is a high potential that is illegal, especially if you say that you're asking money for this and you use that money for something else. Now, the big question there would be proving that that is the case. And I don't necessarily think that it would be easy to prove that. And I think that that is the major point there. But as I was saying earlier, it would be hard to prove that as the topic, really. So I would wait to see more information on DeJoy on if I think his role in what he did was illegal or not. But it is not looking particularly too good for DeJoy. But we're going to get into our next topic here. Having the same problem. Nope, stop. There we go. Alright, that video loaded up, but we're waiting for a New York Post article to load up. Once again, I apologize. I don't know why they decided to have to load up again, but I always try to make sure that everything works before we start. But it looks like my computer decided to not be super good. But we can introduce this topic as we wait. Our next topic is about the COVID probe and the idea of COVID coming from the Wuhan lab. And it's hard to necessarily say with 100% certainty that it has. But there's big allegations now that Fauci and others knew of this theory and knew of this idea a long time ago and either didn't care to really research it fully or have been lying to the public, or both, maybe. And this first couple of articles are talking about that lab leak theory, and then we're going to be talking about kind of the major story of this week with Fauci's emails. So that is a very important thing. Okay. State Department staffers were warned against probing COVID origin. This is by the New York Post. State Department staffers were warned against investigating the origin of COVID-19 because it would open a can of worms, an official revealed in a bombshell report Thursday. So that claim of it opening a bombshell is something I have also been hearing about, and I think has definitely some truths to it. So we all know that on Facebook and whatnot, there was a very early on theory that COVID came out of the lab. And there was a big theory that this may have been an intentional weapon. Now, we're not entirely sure if that is the case, and I don't think that people who say that it was an intentional weapon are being truthful either. So I don't think you can say that without certainty there. But that being said, there was a major reports over the origin of this virus and it potentially being a bioweapon, blah, 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 blah. And it was very early on, and there was a big effort by Fauci, the Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, all these companies in cracking down on misinformation of COVID. And the lab leak theory was under the misinformation. Now, as I was hinting at, and with COVID and with Fauci and the things that Fauci says, is the idea over coronavirus and it coming from the lab. And we're going to get into Fauci's emails, and that Fauci has probably knew about this theory for some time. And now that I start to think about it, I might change the podcast title after I finish here to Fauci playing Roulette with Topics. Excuse me. Right now I have Biden, but this episode is focused a lot on Fauci, really. But we'll be thinking about that one. But that has come to mind as well. So, and I asked on my Discord about the people on if they believed in the virus coming from the lab or not. And it seems to be that people generally had that idea, and there was a lot of just general trust of experts, and I don't necessarily think that that trust is lasting as long as people usually think. So that is very, very important and something to realize as well. Alrighty. Thomas DiNanno, former acting assistant secretary of the State Department, Bureau of Arms Control, Verification, and Compliance, that is a very long title, also told Vanity Fair that the warning smelled like a cover-up. I wasn't going to be a part of it. Vanity Fair cited a 5-page January 9th memo in which DiNanno outlined appreciation and contentment from state technical staff and complete lack of response to briefings and presentations. DiNanno's memo also said that the State Department staffers warned leaders in the bureau not to pursue an investigation into the origins of COVID-19 because it would open a can of worms. A total of 4 ex-State Department officials described being warned against probing the lab leak theory of the pandemic and repeatedly advised not to open up a Pandora's box, the magazine said. In its nearly 12,000-word report, Vanity Fair said that there was about a dozen State Department employees from 4 businesses met on December 9th to discuss an upcoming trip to Wuhan, China. A small group of officials in the department's Army Control, Verification, and Compliance Bureau and repeatedly obtained classified intelligence suggesting that 3 scientists at the Wuhan Institute of Virology were sickened in fall of 2019 while conducting gain of research. Everything we have known before. We're going to just go down on this article just a little bit. Redfield, said leading scientists, including some former friends, were among those who bargained him with angry emails following the March 26 appearance on CNN. One email reportedly said that Redfield, a 20-year-old veteran of the U.S. Army Medical Corps who co-founded the University of Maryland's Institute of Human Virology, should wither and die. I was criticized and abstracted because I proposed another hypothesis, and this was the hypothesis that it did come from the lab. As I was mentioning before, there was a very big push by mass media corporations and social media corporations and Fauci himself, really, that this lab leak theory is something that is not true. 1 second here, gonna take a drink. We're gonna skip this Yahoo News article, but once again, it is linked in the description of this podcast and the description of where you are listening to this live if you are. But we're gonna go down to the Hill article. So you might be asking yourself, how many people do believe in this lab leak theory? There was a big push earlier on Facebook and these other companies that this virus did come from the lab, but it's hard to say how much of a percentage necessarily believed it, and especially once the mass media companies decide to make those claims of it coming from a lab not true, it started to make people probably believe that this virus didn't come from out of the lab, and that was part of the effort to restrict the information. So it's important to think about how much people truly believed in this theory. And there's been several polls out there targeting people and seeing what the percentage of people think about COVID and the origins of it. And I would think right now, if you're listening to this as a podcast or live, how many percent of people do you think believe that this virus came out of a lab? And then I would like to ask, do you believe that this virus came out of the Wuhan lab? After those two questions and thinking about it, I'll tell you what the Hill has to say, but I'll give you a little bit more time here. So, with the effort of these companies reducing the opinion of it being a lab leak, it's probably a percentage that you think of maybe 50-60%. If you're in the 50-60% range, that's kind of what I was thinking. Especially with it being so much in the news recently, I think that people are starting to believe it more and more. But, according to The Hill, this percentage is much higher, at 83%, and I'm going to go ahead and read the headline of The Hill's article. Poll: 83% support U.S. action against China if Wuhan lab theory is proven true. So this is targeted slightly different, and I think that the percentage may be a little bit higher. And now knowing that's the action necessarily, your percentage may change as well. But the poll also goes on to suggest that there's similar to the 83% of people believe that it came from the lab. So there's a very strong emphasis of the people that believe it came from the lab also think that action needs to be taken against China if that lab leak is true. And I think that that also needs to be talked about and needs to be brought up as well. So we'll go ahead and read what this article has to say. A vast majority of voters support the U.S. action against China if evidence proving that coronavirus was leaked from a Wuhan lab. 83% of registered voters from May 30 to June 1st in the survey sorry about that. Okay, here we go. 83% of registered voters in May 30th to June 1st survey said that they support the U.S. government taking action towards China if new intelligence reveals that COVID-19 originated in a lab in the city, while 72% of respondents oppose any action. So that 72% number is interesting to me. The idea that if this theory is true, that we shouldn't be taking any action against it. I don't really think that I have that position, and I would be interested to hear of somebody that has that position. But we'll continue on with our next. In this article brings up some percentages here, and the Harris and Daily poll, where it says that 83% support United States taking action. 44% of that 83% say that they strongly support that, and goes on to talk about age and demographics of the poll. And this is in the Hill article if you want to talk about that one. So one of the major things about the Wuhan lab proving the credibility of the people involved. So as I was mentioning earlier, it's believed that Fauci and many other people, through Fauci's emails and through what Fauci has said and whatnot, have suggested that Fauci knew of this lab leak theory and either just dismissed it or decided to lie. So judging the credibility of Fauci is something that is being done very highly. And I was recently listening to a podcast, and there are people who are not in support of the majority of the COVID things done by the governors and done by the presidents and whatnot. And their whole theory with all this is that Fauci was the go-to guy, and they made him the figurehead of the pandemic. Even the figurehead, when Trump was there, Trump was kind of the figurehead because it was easy to pick on Trump. But Fauci was really the main guy when it comes to COVID, and he's still the main guy now. So now that the credibility now that the credibility of Fauci is being called into action, it's largely speculative with this podcast and what I've heard from some other people that simply they're just trying to get rid of Fauci now, so they're going to throw him under the bus so that they're still kind of able to look good themselves. And they compared it to Cuomo in New York and the fact that he was praised to be one of the best governors at being able to resolve the pandemic, and then it turned out that they was killing a whole bunch of grandmas, so they threw him under the bus, and even his brother kind of went against him, but when before he was kind of always in the media. So, taking that into account, we will listen to this next video where it is talking about Fauci's emails, and I thought I would just play this video to introduce the topic. Oh, let's increase the volume here.
And then going to the emails with Dr. Fauci, there was an exchange between Dr. Collins and Dr. Fauci referencing a Fox News report discussing it as basically the lab leak as a conspiracy. Collins denied, jumping to conclusions, and he asserted that his mention of conspiracies was referring to the rumor that the virus was bioengineered as a weapon. Is that the position of the administration and their top health experts, that this was not engineered, or is that still an open question and part of this review?
Well, I think we've spoken to this pretty extensively from here. Let me just say on Dr. Fauci and his emails, he's also spoken to this many, many times over the course of the last few days, and we'll let him speak for himself. And he's been an undeniable asset in our country's pandemic response. But it's obviously not that advantageous for me to relitigate the substance of emails from 17 months ago. We've launched, based on the president's direction, an entire internal review process to use all of the resources across government to get to the bottom of the origins. And that's a 100-day process, and we'll look forward to providing more when 90 days, when it's concluded.
Can you speak at all to the Vanity Fair report about this State Department fact sheet that came out 5 days before inauguration?
5 days before this president's inauguration?
Correct. Do you know if there was any crossover of that, how that was seen by this administration, the conclusions that they were trying to put out in the final days of the Trump administration?
I think I'm just going to focus on our own internal review that's going to use every resource in the federal government, whether that is our health experts, our medical experts, our national security team, to see what more we can unearth about the origins, which certainly we all want to get to the bottom of. Go ahead.
Yeah, back on infrastructure.
So there we go with that video talking about Fauci's emails, as it's obviously been a major news story. So we're going to go ahead and get to our next website here, talking about Fauci's emails. Now, a lot of what Fauci's doing with his emails, I don't necessarily think are bad. I don't really think that I've seen a email that just makes the whole situation extremely bad. I don't really see that. Now, what it does show is that Fauci at least knew of the virus, and in a large part didn't really do anything to inform the public. In fact, he did the opposite, and that is kind of weird when you think about it. So a lot of people are speculative as to Fauci's motivations for doing so and why he chose to do something like that. And I think that is very confusing, and the fact that it is confusing could suggest that there is a motivation behind it as well. And I don't think you're too far stretched to believe something like that. So we'll get into our first article here. Fauci's emails. Here's what we learned. And I think this can be our last news article here, as I'm just struggling to have all these articles being able to pull up, and I don't want to just keep dragging out if I'm not able to get these articles to work. So I apologize for that. And also, my throat is getting a little bit dry, but we don't need to know about that. So let's just continue and finish this topic, and really the most important topic. But I do apologize that I'm going to have to cut this one just a little shorter. As the COVID-19 pandemic unfolded last year, Dr. Anthony Fauci was fielding dozens of daily requests from government officials, health experts, and the media. Now, thousands of Fauci emails have been released, offering a glimpse into how the nation's leading infectious disease expert dealt with the crisis. As director of the U.S. National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease, Fauci became a prominent, appealing source at the White House. Were Fauci's emails leaked? No, they were released to BuzzFeed and Washington Post. Was Fauci silenced by President Donald Trump? According to his emails, Fauci had little patience for claims that his statements in the early days of the pandemic were being restricted by the Trump administration. In a March 2020 email, Fauci denied being silenced by Trump, writing, "Please stay silent since I have not been muzzled. I will be on multiple TV shows tomorrow and was on Fox this AM. No one is censoring me. I am not being muzzled or censored," he wrote in another email that same month. Was Fauci fired over the emails? No, but several GOP lawmakers have called for Fauci to be fired. Republicans lashed out at Fauci after the email dump, focusing their ire on the fact that he received warnings that the virus may have been engineered. Senator Rand Paul, who has clashed with Fauci on a number of pandemic-related issues this year, tweeted the hashtag #FireFauci on Wednesday. Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene also wrote that Fauci needs to be fired. What was Fauci told us about the origins of COVID-19? The email showed Fauci was warned that an early outbreak that the coronavirus had possibly been engineered. Still, he has had other experts dismiss the coronavirus controversial claim at that point. So you see multiple claims, but the whole idea being that he knew that there was a possibility of this, and it wasn't just a possibility of people that are wackos sending him this and conspiratorial people, but actually experts in epidemiology and experts in virology and experts in the field of medicine and in the field of disease, telling Fauci that they think that what they are seeing doesn't show natural ability of a virus, but rather shows that there's elements of it being engineered and not coming from nature, is the best way to put it. Now, I'll talk about our last topic I'll get to, but unfortunately I'm not going to be able to get to the articles because they're not wanting to load up. But the last topic is over Facebook and mass media censorship, and essentially the idea is being that they are no longer going to repress politicians' viewpoints. So the idea that freedom of speech of the government should now be a lot better. But many Republicans are skeptical if that is really what Facebook is trying to do, or if Facebook is just trying to further themselves away from government and away from politics and away from controversial claims, so that they don't have to sign something like Section 230 or something similar to that in the future. But those articles will be linked in the channel description if you do want to read those yourselves. So I apologize that I'm unable to finish these last couple of articles and that last topic with the articles, but they are just not wanting to load up. But I highly appreciate everybody giving me a listen live or giving me a listen on the podcast, either Apple, Google, or whatever else. And I appreciate all of you, and catch you on the next one.